Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We try very hard to have different kinds of shows. Last week we did one on Parkinson's. We did one on a person who's suffering from Parkinson's. We do political shows. We do spiritual shows and whatever. But we haven't done one really about lawyers. And there's a lot to say. I saw on a TV show last night. It said, "How do you know if a lawyer is lying? Lips are moving." So we don't have the best of all reputations, and some of it is justified. But today we're going to deal with a very unique subject. Well, I guess not that unique. Lawyers and judges struggle with some of the same challenges that all of the rest of the public has, and stress causes lots of issues, and there are lots of different ways to deal with stress. So today's guest is Eric Salzman, who's a lawyer in New Jersey, licensed attorney, and he and I share something similar. He doesn't know it yet. But I was 5 years old when my family told me I was going to be a lawyer. And I know you said you were 14 or something when your family told you. And the explanation was, I have a big mouth. And so be a lawyer, because that's what you're going to do with it. So anyway, I want to welcome Eric today. And we're going to talk about lawyers and judges. And he can tell you first off what he does and what valuable service he provides to our community and actually the community at large. So welcome, Eric. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So
I have another joke. Let me tell you a quick joke about lawyers I heard. It said, what is 100 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean? And it's a good start.
We could do hours of lawyer jokes. I never really took offense to it because there is a kernel of truth in a lot of it. And if you watch the TV shows that feature lawyers, whether it's Lincoln Lawyer or Suits or whatever it is, a lot of those stories are really true. These men and women really do suffer and struggle from stress-related, anxiety-related issues. And so tell us a little bit about what you do and how you do it and what you've been doing.
Absolutely. So right now I am a senior attorney counselor at the New Jersey Lawyers Assistance Program we call NJLAP. And there's a couple of functions there that I provide. So one of them are for law students or anyone who's trying to get admitted to the New Jersey bar who might have something in their background that raises a red flag. So they can come to us for free, and we will do an evaluation and submit it to the character committee to review for their admission to the bar. Now, they don't have to use us. They can use their own people, but that's usually not free. So I think it makes more sense to use us, but whatever. That's up to the individual applicant. But I think more importantly is we provide assistance to attorneys, judges, law students, law graduates that are struggling with addiction. And that doesn't have to be substances, it's behavioral addiction. And the big one is gambling, especially since COVID. When an attorney gambles away their client trust fund, what happens, especially if they don't have malpractice insurance? The state of New Jersey has to foot that bill, and it can be substantial. And that's why we really were created. I mean, not just for gambling, but, that's what we do. So if someone is struggling and they come to us, we provide a variety of services from, short-term counseling, but more importantly, we provide referrals to, mental health experts, but we also have support groups. We have a men's group. We have a women's group. We have a depression group. We are connected to LCL groups, which is Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, which is a separate entity, but it's a 12-step meeting just for attorneys and judges. Because, I'm in recovery myself. So, when I would go to the local meeting, it was kind of hard for me to talk about the stress of a trial or the stress of a judge. Some people, like I had been there initially, I was struggling with living in my car and, being homeless, not having food, all kinds of other issues. So somehow it felt like these were, what do they call them, high-level problems where I didn't feel comfortable sharing them. So we have our own group of just attorneys and judges and law professionals. And we that we meet once a week and we get to talk.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience about some of my colleagues, both in the law, now that I'm retired from the bench. And it's hard. I have a client who's a sitting judge, still sitting right now, Superior Court judge, who is living in his car.
Mhm.
See, how could that possibly be? I mean, he has this reputation and all that because he's got domestic relation issues, and doesn't have enough money to basically take care of everything. He's living in his car, so it happens to everybody. And I want to talk about the 4 different types of lawyers, and we can talk about them one at a time and why they're stressed and what you can do for them under those particular circumstances. I mean, the first lawyer is sole practitioner. All the responsibility, one person
That's me.
providing a service. Well, yeah, I'm sure it is. And second is a member of a boutique law firm, maybe a 6 or 10 lawyers. And that has its own pitfalls when you're in a firm like that. And then you got the big guys. And I was watching a show last night. In fact, we're binging on some of these shows. I was up till 4:30 this morning. I said, I'll watch one more episode. Just one more. And it's about lawyers going through exactly what you are doing now and helping lawyers with similar problems. So it's not a fantasy, it's an actual reality. So the big firms, that's a whole different world by itself. Frankly, I've never been a big fan of the big firms because I know what they do.
That's right.
I knew as a practicing lawyer, both civil and criminal, and both sides, and from the bench as well. And if you saw the Grisham movie, The Firm, you know what they do.
That's right.
It's stall, delay, bill. In fact, one of my friends was a lawyer as well, said you can't bill a closed file. So they keep those files open and bill, bill, bill. And that's what keeps those people working. So anyway, and the fourth, of course, is people who work for the government, whether your salary, if you're limited, but you're still worried about. I remember when I was a deputy DA, district attorney, your assignment in a county where you have like 18 different offices, 18 different courts, where you go depends on your record. Winning cases, getting convictions is counted. You lose a couple of them in a row, something with any publicity, you're going to be in Lancaster. I mean, that's just the way it works. So in each one of these areas, there's a specific. So let's talk about that now and see if we can help educate the public. One of the reasons we have the show, by the way, is to educate the public. That's the purpose of it, really. We're not political. We're not in any way involved in any of that. We're just trying to help the public understand how various things work, whether it's a medical issue or whether it's a legal issue, whatever. So let's take the first group, which is sole practitioners. And of course, there are 2 types of cases. There's hourly cases and there are contingency cases. And there's a combination sometimes as well. But hourly cases require what?
Yeah, listen, if you don't have resources, you're going to have a problem anyway. And that's something that I still am. I maintain an office still, along with working for NJLAP, and I'm a sole practitioner. And, there's a lot of limitations. Again, I don't have the resources to take big cases. I end up finding other lawyers that can take them, but then I feel responsible. So there's a whole nother set of problems with referring cases because I don't just refer them and feel like that's it, wash my hands. I feel responsible. And if they're not getting the right type of representation, that causes anxiety for me. And there's not much I can do about it. I can call whoever I sent it to, but they're not obligated to even speak to me, really. So that right there is a real feeling of helplessness that is very hard for me to just to accept sometimes. So again, as a sole practitioner, there's a lot of anxiety involved. There's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of drinking, and a lot of drugging, and a lot of gambling. And unfortunately, I mean, across the board, as we talk about each group, I mean, it has its own particular stressors. And usually the type of personalities that go into law, they're a personality often. And, there's some issues that kind of, intersect there as well. So we have someone at high risk for addiction just based on their personality type. And now you throw them in a job where often they feel like they're not in control. And what do we do when we're not in control? We try to control something, right? And often it's not healthy. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but it is a problem. And people are starting to recognize it. And hopefully, the environment is starting to change. We'll talk about that when we talk about some of the big firms, because that's one of my pet peeves is the pressure they put on new associates to rack up billable hours. And
we're going to save time for that subject because that's a hot subject today, politically, even with the big firms.
Absolutely.
And the reality is, if you're a sole practitioner, there's, like I said, two different types of cases. An hourly case, you got to put in the time. You're not going anywhere because you got a calendar to meet, judges' requirements, paperwork, and whatever, and an expense. Sometimes it's hard to get your money back, and you're by yourself. And so on an hourly case, you better get paid, because if you're not, you're going to find yourself at the bank. And banks are not exactly liberal in terms of lending money to lawyers. That's what I have found.
And by the way, you can't get out of a case because your client, in criminal defense, if I have a client, once I am the attorney of record, I can't go to the judge and say, hey, I'm not getting paid, let me out of this case. It just doesn't happen that way. So I'm stuck. And unfortunately, I have a lot of empathy for people because I've been through a lot of things. So if I feel like somebody really needs my help, I'm going to help them. And they usually promise all kinds of things, and they probably mean it when they're saying it, but sometimes it's not really based in reality, and I don't get paid. And really, if I got a fraction of the money people have owed me over the decades, I could retire. So,
Well, the reality is, you want to believe them. You want to believe in their honesty and integrity. And I've been there. In fact, I'm still chasing somebody right now with a large debt. And you're stuck because you're by yourself. And that's those hourlies. On a contingency, it's sometimes even worse.
Right.
Because you have to come up with costs. And most cases involve expert witnesses. And a good expert witness is going to cost $25,000, $50,000, $75,000. And you become the bank. And you have to wait until the case gets resolved, hopefully that you won it, in order to get paid. And a lot of times,
the experts don't wait. They don't want to wait, right?
Oh, they can't wait because it affects their credibility. If they are owed money, a jury knows that they have an interest in the outcome. So you can't owe them. But the reality is, the more contingency cases you take, potentially the worse it is, because you get yourself really spread thin as an individual. And you talked before about gambling and talking about taking the client's money. One of the premier lawyers in California is going to jail. He stole basically millions of dollars from the clients. When they settled the case, he took the money. And he's been disbarred, obviously. And people are tempted. When you're in that situation, you say to yourself, I suppose, I never did it because I always was afraid of getting caught. But that's not the real reason. But the fact that if you're busted and you haven't got credit or whatever, and you get money goes into the trust account, the temptation is there. A lot of people can't handle it, can't handle the stress of not having it, and they go and they steal it. So contingencies, a lot of times lawyers will settle cases sooner rather than later because that ends the case and they get paid. And so the client ends up suffering from that because they don't get what they're really entitled to. So now that I gave my little speech, tell me what you think.
Well, I agree. Yes, everything you said, I agree with. I mean, you're preaching to the choir. These are things that I've experienced myself as a sole practitioner. And now when I'm helping other attorneys, that's really what most of the problems are. They end up acting out through various addictions, but the underlying problem is they're overwhelmed with the work and they don't have the funds to actually do the case to the level of their ability, especially when they're expecting. I mean, a lot of the cases I would take on contingency, I had the contract that the client would pay those fees up front. But what do you do when they can't, right? Now, I'm not going to, if I just drop the case at that point, I'm not getting paid. I mean, with civil cases, you can get out, but it's still, listen, I'm not technically in it for the money. I'm in it because I care about the people I'm representing. So if they don't have the money, it's not going to break. I'm not going to drop the case. But I do resent being lied to and misled. And, people do it. And I try not to judge them for it, especially if they're suffering. Addiction hijacks your brain. So people will say things that they honestly believe to be true. Their intentions are 100% real. But once your brain gets hijacked, forget it. I can tell you endless stories about myself promising borrow a car. I'll be back in 2 hours. I go down to a certain part of some town to go get drugs. And I'd say to myself, I'm not going to do any drugs until I get back to where I'm, leaving from, because I know I'm not going to leave. I'm going to stay there. And every time on the way down, I'd swear I'm not going to do it. And I would do it. And then sometimes I'd disappear for 3 days with somebody's car, and they're like, you're a liar. You did it on purpose. And I'm like, no, I really honestly did not intend that to happen. But people don't believe that unless they've experienced that type of issue themselves. They don't believe you. They think you set them up, you lied, you manipulated, and that's the reality, right?
Well,
So,
the reality, when I got out of the DA's office and I was in the courthouse walking around, a guy came over and said to me, are you a lawyer? I said, oh, yes, yes, yes. I need a lawyer, criminal case.
mm,
So I knew the judge. In fact, that judge had hired me as a deputy DA. So we knew each other.
mm,
And I went in and I announced who I was representing. And he very quickly said, has Mr. Green showed up yet? I said, I stopped. I said, Mr. Green. He was talking about, did you get paid? Because once you're in it, you're in it.
that's right.
Notwithstanding forceful labor, you're in it. And the closer you get to a trial, the worse it is.
Right.
And then you're stuck, win, lose, or draw. And in criminal cases, we used to always say, get the money while the tears are still falling.
That's right.
Because if you don't, you
You're
ain't
never
never
going
going
to
to
get
get
it.
paid. That's just the way it works. So we talked about the sole practitioner, a lot of pressure, time especially. And if you're dealing with deep-pocketed defendants on the other side, they know it. And they will work you real well. I remember one time years ago, some big insurance defense firm had me running all around the country. Every time I wanted to take a witness's depot, they moved him someplace. Oh, he's in Texas now.
Yeah.
Or, oh, yeah, well, he's in the home office. And they know how to work it. And that's exactly what they do. So you're under constant pressure. And judges will stick time limits on you. So you can't say, I'll get to it when I get to it. I mean, it's just the way it is. I was very good, by the way, at giving continuances because I did relate to what the lawyers were going through, and I didn't want to make it any worse for them. But the reality is, you're under tremendous pressure, financial pressure, and as you said, taking responsibility type pressure. That's a sole practitioner. So then we move on to the next group, which is the boutique. And what's your experience been with boutique firms?
It's very similar, except now they feel responsible to their partners, right? This is not that many attorneys. Especially the ones that are starting, with, people who were just graduated law school, it might, join one, and the anxiety that they experience because they feel like they're letting their partners down. And that puts a whole different type of pressure on them. And again, if they don't win, cases, they're going to lose their job, right? Or they're just, no one's going to want to hire them. The public doesn't want to hire a lawyer that doesn't have a reputation of success. So there is all that pressure as well. And again, the personality of people who tend to go into this field, there is a high rate of addiction. And it really, until now, it's been, brushed under the carpet, right? So it was like that elephant in the room. And the denial, I mean, the whole industry was in denial, not just the individuals. It was just, I don't know. To me, look, the clients, the public loses at the end, right? They're the ones who are going to suffer if the attorney isn't doing what they're supposed to do. And yeah, it's very sad, actually. I have a lot of empathy for these individual attorneys, and it's very hard too for them to get sober, even from behavioral addictions, because they don't believe that they're powerless over something, right? So this is all about, they spend their whole career in controlling the facts, controlling the narrative, right? And now this is something they have to admit that they can't control, and their life is unmanageable. And that is the hardest thing for a lot of attorneys and judges, to come to that realization. So I think with the boutique lawyers, it's almost harder, because they, like I said, they feel responsible to their partners. It's not a huge firm. Like their results affects everybody's pocket in the firm, right? So a lot of pressure.
Well, I think, and I can speak for personal experience going back many years when I was in one of these boutique firms,
Mm.
and one of the guys was losing on a regular basis. And what happens with that, when that happens?
You gotta go.
The firm breaks up, and now you got clients have basically adverse interests, because one client wants to stay with the firm, another one doesn't, et cetera, et cetera. So boutique, I think boutique is better than single, because you have the ability to spread the risk. And lawyer A may be supporting lawyers B and C and D, but you have that constant requirement that you meet the expectations of your partners, for want of a better word. And so that causes stress too. What do you do about that when you are advising lawyers in that kind of situation? What's the remedy, if any? I can't hear you all of a sudden. Somehow you blotted out. Eric, I can't hear you. Can you hear me? But I can't hear you. Let's see. And I'm no computer genius, so I can't figure this out. So hopefully Carrie is watching.
Ah, okay.
There we go.
I'm sorry. I don't know what
Okay.
you heard, but I don't remember. So what was your question?
What kind of remedies do you have
Yeah.
for people
Okay.
who are in a situation where they're in a small boutique firm,
Right.
and they're experiencing the things that happen to small firms,
To acknowledge it
and
early.
financial issues?
Yeah, I think the key there is to be mindful, right, and to acknowledge it before it snowballs into a big problem that's going to affect the whole firm. So, and I think you're right. At the boutique, at least people, they're not in competition like the large firms, and they can rely on assistance from each other. But that's only if you're honest with each other. So, if someone's in denial and they're not going to even admit to themselves that they're struggling, that's a problem. And I don't know if you heard what I said before, but we have a saying: if you can't name it, you can't tame it. So until somebody can recognize it and then own it and then do something about it. So that's one of the things that I try to do. If someone comes in, a lot of people don't understand how they got to that point, and we kind of just dissect it and get an idea of the early warning signs to prevent it in the future. And then we come up with some, real life solutions.
What do you see? What do you see as an early sign? What
Oh,
tips you off?
well, one of the things is taking too many cases, right? Like, attorneys taking cases that are beyond their resources to handle happens all the time. And a lot of it is just, it's wishful thinking, and again, people who have that addiction predisposition, they also kind of believe in magical thinking sometimes, and that is the source of that initially. But yeah, it's really hard. People, mindfulness is popular now, but years ago, first of all, it was a concept that didn't even exist when I was growing up, and if it had, I think it would have changed the direction of my life, quite frankly. But at least today, these students that are graduating now, they've grown up in an era where they are not afraid to admitting that you have a problem is a badge of honor almost, because it shows that you have insight into who you are, and that is a positive quality today. So hopefully that's going to make a difference. And I think once the industry changes and realizes that it's the industry putting pressure on people at all levels of practice, then we can start to address the problem, to prevent it, instead of always trying to fix the problem afterwards.
Well, you mentioned kind of an analysis before lawyers actually go into practice, bar association review, moral conduct, and the rest. Do you think that that should become mandatory across the country, that people have to go through some kind of counseling or the equivalent of an internship?
Listen, I personally, yeah. I mean, the problem is, of course, no one's going to want to do it, But yeah, I think that, first of all, we are discussing it more. Like, I go to law schools in the area and present the first year and tell them all about, well, who we are, what we do, what we offer. And hopefully it's planted a seed that they will, take advantage of if there's issues. Something else, New Jersey just passed a new rule very recently, the Supreme Court here, which is our highest court, that created the ability for a third party to call us at NJLAP and say, listen, I know a judge, a lawyer, a law professional that I feel is struggling with, and we can reach out to that person now. It's totally confidential. We don't report them. We don't even say who called us, but now we can help people based on these third-party referrals. And I think that's great, because other people see the problem, before the individual sees their problem. The world, outside world knows. I mean, for several years before I got sober, I thought I was doing okay. Let me tell you something. The judge made me take a drug test during a trial. He called me into his chambers. He said, I think you're under the influence of something. It turned out I wasn't. I just was very tired because I had been doing cocaine to stay awake and do research for this one motion argument. So I passed the drug test, but still, the bottom line is that I thought I looked and was doing fine, and obviously I wasn't. So it's that level of denial. Now, at least when an outsider sees it, we can help them. So,
But why gambling of all the addictions? Why do people end up gambling their money away as opposed to drinking it or taking drugs to kind of numb the
well,
feeling, whatever it may be, or be? But why gambling?
look, addiction is an avoidance of something, right? Normal, across the board. However, when you're talking about gambling, there's this other payoff, right? That, look, I can win. I can not only give the money back to the client, but I can make more money that way, and I can help other clients or help myself. There was a case years ago, though, where this attorney, his wife needed cancer surgery, and he didn't have the money. And in one of his trust funds was a lot of money, and he was expecting money the following week. So the woman needed surgery right away. He takes the client's money, he gets the surgery, he puts the money back. He got caught. He got disbarred for life. So, and that's another thing in New Jersey. It used to be once you were disbarred, you were never allowed back in. But that now has changed. There is a pathway back to practice.
Yeah, we have it in California too.
Oh,
Let's go on to the big firms
sure.
and the 2,000 person firm, and tell me how it works. I don't want to do a speech because I don't want to be considered.
That's the cutthroat world, right? That reminds me of law school, when you go to the law library, when we used to have books, right? That people would cut out the case that was for the legal research assignment. So they would be the only ones that got a good grade, or, it was crazy. But the same thing happens in the large firms. There's a lot of cutthroat, a lot of competition. And then there's this push for billable hours, right? And it's like at any expense, billable hours. And I've be honest with you, that's where I see a majority of the problems, because that is so much pressure, especially for a young associate, to be able to produce these hours. And that's the move that we're trying to kind of initiate now, is where the big law firms are making these pacts with us and the Supreme Court, that they are going to practice this attorney wellness, and they're going to focus on making sure their young lawyers are emotionally fit and healthy. Now, a lot of it, unfortunately, is lip service to, still, but I think eventually, if this gets put into place, it's going to change the entire industry.
Well,
But
it's
not yet.
interesting. I know that you read or you hear stories about lawyers being recruited out of the big, more popular law schools.
Sure.
And they start off with salaries of a couple of $100,000 a year. I mean, it's zero experience, but
Right.
they come out of an Ivy League school or whatever. What do they have to do when they take that kind of job? I know the answer, but you can tell me what do they
answer
have
to me
to
is
do?
don't take that kind of job. I mean, it just puts so much pressure on you. But I guess the real answer is to be realistic and to be mindful. To me, being mindful is really the answer to everything. It's not a solution, but at least, like I said, you can name it, then you could tame it. If you're not mindful and you are not in touch with what motivates you and your own patterns of behavior, you're just not going to see it, and it's going to get out of control. And look, there's they don't sleep much. They don't have time to eat much. It's worse than law school, I got to say. I mean, the first year of law school is very stressful, but starting at a big firm with that kind of salary, where it's so competitive to get those jobs, that's a lot of pressure. And there's a lot of drinking, a lot of liquid lunches. And I'll tell you what, the movies and TV shows don't help. Who goes? I think it's malpractice to be, working on a strategy and then drinking while you're doing it. I don't know where these shows come off showing, we have a problem. Let's sit down and talk about it. But you want to drink? You want to drink? You want to drink? What the hell is that? But again, that's our society today. So that needs to change too.
Well, you also hear often that they're working really hard when they start with the goal of becoming a partner.
Mm-mm.
And that's the carrot that is offered to these people. It usually takes 5, 6, 7 years. So I'm told.
Yeah.
And so what in order to get there, what do you got to do?
You gotta be vicious. You gotta
Bill those hours.
Billable hours. You gotta billable hours, and no matter what. And like you said, if the file is closed, you can't bill. So again, the public suffers. All of these things result in the public having, we have a bad reputation, and it's really unfortunate. But sometimes it's deserved, like you said. I mean, I have horror.
I always said in my book, which I understand you have.
I have, but just got it, haven't read it, so I can't comment.
In my book, I talk about how do you become a judge and who are the judges, people's perception of who they are and how did you get there. Mm-hmm. And I can tell this one story I tell it all the time. I tried a case probably 40 years ago in Riverside, California. It was an insurance case against an insurance company. And the presiding judge in that court picked this judge out of retirement to handle the case. What was interesting is that judge was an insurance defense lawyer for many years. And who did he pick? One of his buddies, who had also been an insurance defense lawyer, even though there were other judges available.
Mm-hmm.
And so he picked the jury, and we're trying, this judge is falling asleep. So I go to the bench one time, bench conference, and he's reeking of alcohol. I mean, he's really, really, really drunk. And he would get up and he would walk around the little platform we have there. And he threw the case out, granted a motion for what's called a non-suit. Case was over. And so I got statements from the court reporter and the clerk, because he was temporary. They didn't have a relationship with him. They both said the same thing. The guy was drunk. After lunch, he was worse.
Mm-hmm.
He was really drunk. So I got at least a break to go to another judge to make my motion to set aside the decision. That judge was a terrific judge. He saw it. He knew exactly what happened. In fact, that judge ended up on the Court of Appeals. Very smart guy. He granted my motion, and the insurance company appealed to the 4th District. And I went up to argue it, that the judge that had granted our motion should be affirmed. And you know what they said? We know Judge Cunningham for many years when he was in the legislature. He's a decent, honest man, and denied my motion. I later found out one of those justices was the father of a friend of mine. And she told me that he was connected with the insurance industry. And so even though it was what it was, there is a limitation, I suppose, on justice. And I've seen some judges that are not capable or competent to even be on the bench. How do you get there? You'll see in the book 3 ways. 1, you get appointed, means you got to know somebody, generally. 2, you get elected, which means you got to spend a whole bunch of money in media and everything else. And the 3rd, which is being appointed by the presiding judge of the district on a temporary basis. And they vet you pretty good for that. But that's the 3rd way. But some of the judges are lazy. Some of them are not very bright. Some of them will do whatever they want. They feel they got anointed rather than being appointed.
Right.
And a judge told me that, a friend of mine.
I like that.
Today, look, some of these guys think they've been anointed. And so that's what you see in some of the system. And it's not a whole lot better with the lawyers. I was talking about this one guy. This was a famous lawyer. I mean, famous beyond famous. Remember Aaron Brockovich? He was the lawyer in that case. Millions. Owned 2 planes, hotels, the whole deal. And he got caught. Finally, somebody got him. And they unraveled all the years he'd been stealing all this money, doing what is the classic Ponzi scheme. Like a lot of lawyers do. And we're educating the public. Watch out. A Ponzi scheme is the money comes in for your case. The lawyer takes your money, doesn't give it to you. The next case settles, takes the money, then he gives it to you because he's got to catch up. And ultimately, they all fold because they run out of resources to do it. And so the system is certainly not foolproof. And I want to really emphasize, and the reason we're doing the show is I want people to know there's things being done by people like you to make things better, more honest, with more integrity, and more concern for people's individuals' rights and how they feel. Not everybody is a good person when they get their license to practice law. Doesn't give you a real license to do the right thing. And that's where it is. So I want to thank you, Eric, for being our guest today and commend you for the kind of work you're doing. And it really is basically not seen by the public. And I want, as part of the show, the public to know that there are people like you that are out there and they do care and they've been there. And because they've been there, they have a better understanding of how they can get you there. So gambling and addiction is not necessarily a fatality.
That's right.
We were talking about Parkinson's last week. It's you don't die from it, you die with it. And so these people be saved and helped if they reach the right people. So how do they get a hold of you?
Oh, well, we have a website, of course, and you go there, and we just had a whole presentation 5 days this week of attorney. This is a Wellness in the Law Week, and apparently I thought it was just Jersey, but it's national across the country, and we had presentations all week. Today I hosted one on social well-being, and tomorrow is emotional well-being. And like I said, we're pushing to get lawyers to focus on well-being. And we have our website, we have a YouTube channel, and just look up NJLAP. And also, every state has a lawyer's assistance program. So if you're in another state, please reach out to them. I'm sure a lot of people don't know they exist either, but every state has one, and we can help. And
If you're a member of the public and you suspect that your lawyer is either addicted to something or is not doing something proper, what's the first step that they should take?
We weren't designed as much for that as another law professional, but if somebody really cares, like they're not going to it's not a grievance process. They're not going to have if they care and they want to see that judge or lawyer get help, you call us and we will reach out to them and we will do our best to have, them accept our help, which is hard sometimes because, denial, like they say, it's powerful, but and what do they say? It's not a river in Egypt or some silly joke. But again,
I was going to use that joke, but I decided not to.
Yeah, it's very real. And it really, but I understand that. And that's the thing. I get denial. So I think I'm good at, pointing it out to somebody who's suffering with it. But that's all you can do. You call us if you care. If you want vengeance, don't call us.
Well, the point of this, actually, I've mentioned this before, not to be redundant, is that if somebody's watching or listening and has a problem, is unaware of remedies,
right
now they know.
That's right.
And if one person or two people who are listening and said, you know what, I'm a little suspicious of my lawyer for A, B, and C, and they call you, and we did a good deed. That's the whole object.
That's
so
right.
Again, Eric, thank you. I hope you enjoy the book. And let me know what you think. It's called From the Trench to the Bench, and it traces a lot of real honest. Every story in there is legitimate, and it really talks about the legal system and how it really works from somebody who was once inside it. I guess I still am. So anyway, thanks again, Eric, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
And don't forget, we also have the program that helps judges. So if you want to focus on that one time, let me know. That's a whole other thing.
I'll get my friend out of the car. Maybe he can move into a motel.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you.